In 1958, Ferrari entered Formula One, expecting another season at the top. Instead, it was beaten by a team that barely existed a few years earlier. A British team with no road cars, no racing dynasty, and an owner who had once supplied parts to Ferrari itself. Even stranger, he had started his journey by buying Ferraris, painting them green, and studying how they worked. Then, he built something of his own. By the end of 1958, those green cars had beaten Ferrari 6 times and taken the first Constructors' World Championship in Formula One history. But just as Vanwall reached the top, the team almost disappeared. So how did a bearing manufacturer build a car capable of beating Ferrari, and why did it vanish almost immediately after winning? In the early 1950s, Grand Prix racing was dominated by continental Europe. Alfa Romeo, Maserati, Mercedes-Benz, and, increasingly, Ferrari. Britain had talented drivers and brilliant engineers, but it still lacked a Formula One machine capable of consistently defeating the major factories. Tony Vandervelde wanted to change that. Vandervelde was not a traditional racing car constructor. He was an industrialist. His fortune came from thin-wall engine bearings, components used by some of the world's major manufacturers, including Ferrari. That meant the man who would eventually become obsessed with defeating Enzo Ferrari was initially helping keep Ferrari engines alive. Vandervelde had already supported Britain's ambitious BRM project, hoping it would finally give the country a world-beating Grand Prix car. But he became frustrated. Too many committees, too many delays, not enough winning, so he walked away. If Britain was going to build the car Vandervelde wanted, he would do it himself. But first, he studied the enemy. Vandervelde bought Ferrari racing cars, modified them, and entered them as thin-wall specials. Ferraris painted British racing green. They were competitive racing machines, but they were also something more important: research tools. His engineers could study how Ferrari approached engines, chassis design, and reliability. They could see what worked and what did not. Eventually, modifying somebody else's Ferrari was no longer enough. Vandervelde wanted his own car, his own engine, and eventually, his own victory. The machine that emerged was unusual. Its 2.5-liter four-cylinder engine drew heavily from ideas developed through Norton's successful racing motorcycles. But Vandervelde's real strength was not one single component. It was the people he brought together. Colin Chapman helped develop the chassis. Frank Costin worked on the aerodynamics. The car used powerful disc brakes. The body was narrow and carefully shaped. Vanwall was beginning to combine different pieces of specialist British engineering into one very fast machine. Ferrari had decades of experience. Vandervelde had specialists attacking every weakness they could find. On paper, Vanwall looked unconventional. On the circuit, it was becoming dangerous. There was just one problem: it kept breaking. The early Vanwalls suffered from cooling problems, mechanical failures, and handling issues. Speed was there, reliability was not. But Vandervelde treated every failure as another problem to solve. He kept redesigning, keep improving, keep spending. Then, in 1956, came the first real warning. Stirling Moss won the non-championship International Trophy at Silverstone in a Vanwall. It did not count toward the World Championship, but it proved the car could win. And in 1957, Vanwall finally did it when the points mattered. At the British Grand Prix, Moss started in one Vanwall while Tony Brooks drove another. When Moss's car developed trouble, the rules of the era allowed him to take over Brooks's machine. Together, they won. British drivers, a British team, a British-built Formula One car, winning the British Grand Prix. For Vandervelde, It was the breakthrough he had spent years chasing. But Vanwall did not stop there. Moss won again at Pescara, then again at Monza. Ferrari could no longer dismiss the green cars as a strange British experiment. Vanwall had become a genuine threat, and 1958 would decide whether it could finish the job. New fuel regulations reduced some of Vanwall's engine advantage. Ferrari arrived with the new dyno 246 V6 and plenty of power. On paper, that should have helped the Italians, but Vanwall had become more than an engine. It had aerodynamics, disc brakes, a strong chassis, and exceptional drivers. At Zandvoort, Vanwall locked out the front row. Moss won. Tony Brooks won in Belgium, then Germany. Moss won Portugal. Brooks won Italy. Race after race, the green cars kept beating Ferrari. And yet the championship was not going the way you might expect. Vanwall was fast, but it was still not always reliable. Moss could dominate when his car survived. Ferrari's Mike Hawthorn took a different route. He won only one championship Grand Prix that season, but he kept finishing near the front, second place after second place. Points, consistency, survival. So by the final part of the season, Vanwall was becoming the strongest constructor, while Ferrari could still produce the Drivers' World Champion. And then Stirling Moss made a decision that would come back to haunt him. At the Portuguese Grand Prix, Moss won for Vanwall. Hawthorn finished second, but Hawthorn had spun and used an escape road while recovering. Officials considered disqualifying him. For Moss, that could have been a massive championship advantage. He could have stayed quiet. Instead, he defended his rival. Moss explained what had happened and helped convince officials not to disqualify Hawthorn. Hawthorn kept second place and kept the points. It was extraordinary sportsmanship. It would also prove incredibly expensive. Before we get to the race that decided everything, if there is another forgotten racing machine or team from this era you want covered next, put it in the comments. And if you enjoy stories like this, subscribe so you do not miss the next one. By the time Formula One arrived in Morocco for the final race of 1958, the situation was brutal. Moss needed to win, and Hawthorn needed to finish no higher than third. One Grand Prix, two championships, Ferrari against Vanwall, October 19th, 1958, Ain Diab, near Casablanca. Mike Hawthorn started from pole for Ferrari. Stirling Moss lined up beside him. When the race began, Moss attacked immediately. By the end of the first lap, the green Vanwall was leading. Then he began to pull away. The gap grew. Moss set the fastest lap. He was doing everything within his control. But behind him, Ferrari was no longer thinking about winning the race. It was thinking about winning the championship. Phil Hill was running ahead of Hawthorn, but Ferrari did not need Hill in second. It needed Hawthorn there, so Hill allowed his teammate through. That one position changed everything. Moss continued at the front. There was nothing else he could do. Then the race turned from championship drama into tragedy. Vanwall driver Stuart Lewis Evans suffered an engine failure. His car crashed and caught fire. Lewis Evans suffered terrible burns. At the front, Moss kept driving. He led all 53 laps. He won by more than a minute, and he set the fastest lap. It was almost the perfect race. Almost. Mike Hawthorn crossed the line second. When the championship points were calculated, Hawthorn had 42, Moss had 41, 1 point. The driver Moss had helped save from disqualification in Portugal, had beaten him to the World Championship. But Tony Vandervelde had finally won his own war. Vanwall finished ahead of Ferrari in the Constructors' Championship. The first Constructors' World Championship in Formula One history belonged to Vanwall. A British bearing manufacturer had built a racing team and beaten Ferrari 6 times in one season. It should have been the beginning of something enormous. Instead, it was almost the end. Stuart Lewis Evans died from his injuries 6 days after the Moroccan Grand Prix. He was 28 years old. Vandervelde was devastated. His own health was also deteriorating, and 1958 became Vanwall's final full Formula One season. The team would never win another World Championship Grand Prix. That is what makes Vanwall's story so unusual. Most great teams build dynasties. Vanwall reached the top and disappeared, but its impact was already permanent. It proved that a specialist British team could defeat the giant European factories. Soon, Cooper and Lotus would take British Formula One even further. The cars themselves would change too. Rear-engined machines were coming, making Vanwall's front-engine design obsolete almost immediately. But Tony Vandervelde had already broken the barrier. He began by buying Ferraris and painting them green because Britain did not have the car he wanted. Less than a decade later, Ferrari was chasing his green cars for a world championship. He supplied the enemy, then studied the enemy, then built his own machine, and the first time Formula One asked which constructor was the best in the world, the answer was Vanwall. Ferrari continued for generations. Vanwall almost vanished overnight. But for one extraordinary season, in 1958, the Green Outsiders beat the Red Empire.